Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. It is the daily show, and it is Friday. I almost said Saturday. Friday, July 21st. Today we have myself, James, joined by Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Nothing like a little Friday podcast. I don't know if I've done one of these.
Yeah, I think I've done a couple Fridays, but usually I'm towards the top of the week. But
Yeah.
Friday it's nice out, so vibes are good today. And today we're going to start with some Madden rankings, and then we're going to work over to some UFC news. But the quarterback rankings just came out, which is obviously the most important Madden ranking. So we're going to throw those up on the screen and kind of give our thoughts and reactions to kind of the Madden rankings at the QB position. So to start it off here, at the top, we've got Patrick Mahomes, 99 overall. I think that was maybe even already announced, but I think that was pretty expected. And then going down the list, Joe Burrow, 95, Josh Allen, 94, Lamar Jackson, 91, and Jalen Hurts at an 88 are the top five. Now, I guess my kind of initial reaction here in terms of Madden rankings. Yeah, and I didn't address it, but Trey did in the comments. But Anthony,
Uh,
rocking the stash.
I appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Um, but I guess my initial reaction is just kind of the drop off after Mahomes. Usually they try and
Yeah.
clump some guys towards the top, but they drop from 99 all the way down to 95. That was kind of a surprise to me. What stands out to you here in the upper portion of the QB rankings?
Um. Well, yeah, that was the first thing too. Specifically with I feel like video games in general. Um. Usually you don't see that big of a gap, I'd say, between the first quarterback and the second quarterback. But one of the other things that stands out is I thought maybe, if I know it was only 1 year, but I thought Jalen Hurts would at least have been a 90. But maybe they want him to prove it again. But the other thing is, I'm just surprised how far Justin Herbert's fallen to like an 87. And I don't think if you ask a lot of people, I don't think they would say Justin Herbert and Dak are like the same level necessarily. But could be fair because Dak gets a lot of hate as a Cowboys quarterback, but he gets a lot of hate from Cowboys fans specifically too, though. But the 87s, them being in the same range, or like even yeah, because even Jalen Hurts being one better than Dak. But I think these are interesting rankings, though, some ratings.
Yeah, I'm with you too because I think the top portion of that, the 2 and 3 with Burrow and Allen at 2 and 3 are fairly good.
Hmm.
You can argue all day whether you think Josh Allen or Joe Burrow is better. That at this point, I think a lot of people are on both sides of that debate, but they keep them close in the rankings, so I can't complain about that. But after that, I think the drop to Lamar Jackson at a 91 is crazy. And then Jalen Hurts, like you said, not even a 90. I probably would have put him above Lamar Jackson. And then scroll down further, I'm 100% with you in terms of Justin Herbert. I think he is better than Dak Prescott. And like you said, Dak Prescott gets a lot of hate, and I think he's probably better than a lot of people assume. That said,
Hmm.
I think in 87 and tied with Herbert is a little generous, actually probably quite a bit generous. But and then at the bottom portion here, once again, you kind of get another big drop off from your mid 80s to Rogers at 86, not a big drop off, but then Kirk, you're only 84, Tua at an 83. And I will admit some of these guys are hard to rank, especially a guy like Aaron Rodgers, for example. Where how do you rank Aaron Rodgers considering the career body of work he has and where
Yeah.
he's still at now? Kind of a tough guy to rank, but I'm not going to complain about an 86 for him. What are your thoughts on this kind of lower portion here of the top 10 quarterbacks?
I think that Rodgers one, I think will definitely change. As in, we'll see he's with the new team, new look, new weapons. See how that translates over the next season. But the other thing that's interesting, while I'm not mad at Kirk Cousins 84, what is that? That's nine, I think, on the list. On the full. So
Mm-hmm.
arguably, so is he the ninth best quarterback then? Is
Yep.
what Madden's saying, which doesn't sound quite right to me. But I don't know if you scrolled down. I mean. maybe what other quarterbacks I would put ahead of him, but that's another thing. For people saying that maybe not necessarily a game manager, because I do think he has a little bit more upside as a passer, specifically with like obviously he's throwing to Justin Jefferson. But people think Kirk Cousins is the reason the Vikings won't be successful in the postseason, or he's one of the major reasons, I should say. But then if you look at it this way, I mean, ninth best quarterback, that I would think that would be enough to get you to a deep playoff run at least.
Yeah, I'm with you too, and we'll have to hop over to page 2 here in a second. But
Oh, okay.
when it comes down to like Kirk Cousins at an 84, there's gonna probably be some guys on the second page that you'd probably, at least me personally, there's gonna be guys on page 2 that I probably say are better than Kirk Cousins, and I don't think I'd label Kirk Cousins a top 9 quarterback, even a top
Uh-huh.
10. And once we flip over to page 2, there will be some guys there that I imagine will both have over him.
Can we scroll back up to the top a little bit? I think
Yeah, yeah,
I've seen because since this is a Madden list and I do I buy all the Maddens and start the ultimate team and do everything, but I saw it's just he's so broken. 96 speed for Lamar Jackson. I thought Jalen Hurts was maybe going to be a little faster, but I think 89 is actually pretty fair.
hmm
But um, I mean, you can't that fourth even like the fourth best quarterback rating wise, 96 speed is killer.
yeah. That and when me and Isaiah did running backs and wide receivers on Wednesday, and we talked
Hmm.
about speeds. Most of the top running backs and top receivers were below 96. It's like
Really?
that is faster than most of the skilled players, regardless of position. So I think that is quite. I mean, obviously he's quick. I'm not saying he's slow,
Yeah.
but as far as like gameplay goes, it's going to be really interesting to see because he's probably going to be broken once again.
Yeah. Well, Lamar Jackson is a running back, though. No
Yeah.
shit.
And then once you look at the last thing I'll say here on the first page of backs or quarterbacks
Hmm.
is Tua getting some respect in the 10
Yeah.
slot. 83 doesn't really jump off the page, but similar to Kirk Cousins, putting him at the 10 slot is a lot of respect, and I don't hate it. I like Tua. I think I'm a little bit higher on Tua. I don't know if I should say higher than most, but I like Tua as a quarterback,
Hmm.
so I'm cool giving him that respect. And in 83, at the end of the day, it's not like they gave him an 87,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but still putting him at 10th is some respect. So credit to them for that because I kind of assumed that they'd be Madden, that is, would be a little bit lower on him,
Yeah.
but credit to him
Well, I
for getting
thought
him in a
the
good spot.
interesting. I would have to go back to last year's. I wonder what Joe Burrow was rated last year because I thought even 95, even though there is such a big drop off, but to be the second highest rated quarterback too, though, I thought was a big step up for him.
Mhm.
I'm sure he wasn't like too far down as of last year, but he's already kind of cemented himself then as one of the best quarterbacks besides football, but certainly in this game. Then 95.
Yeah. And then on the second page here, I imagine when the theme of when we were doing running backs and wide receivers is the more pages you go in, the worse the ratings get. So
Hmm.
keep that in mind as we start here on page 2. But Trevor Lawrence, 82 to start the list, and you go Geno Smith
Geno Smith,
at an 81, Jared Goff in 80, Kyler Murray 79, Derek Carr 78, Deshaun Watson 78, Jimmy Garoppolo 77, Russell Wilson 77, Justin Fields 76,
76.
and Tannehill 76. So I guess the first thing I have is talking about guys that are probably better than Kirk Cousins. Trevor
Hmm.
Lawrence is a guy that I probably would have put
Exactly.
there on the first page over him.
I agree. I think Madden is kind of one of the things I feel like they really make you earn it. Like you got to show it for a couple seasons, and then like once you do, like the Aaron Rodgers is still so high. Or they
Mhm.
did this with receivers a lot. Julio was always up top, even when he kind of his like on-field achievements or his stats declined a little bit. He was still always like one of the top five receivers. Or I would do what was Hopkins rated in this
Hopkins.
game?
So we kind of had a fun little, we went down a path with Hopkins because he came out at a 93, and then when we checked the ratings, he was off the ratings. because
Okay.
that was the one that people complained about the most was Hopkins 93. And we pulled up the list of ratings and his name was completely gone. So I don't know if they're going to change that or not, but that was
Uh-huh.
the initial was 93, and that is the definition of like he was good 2 or 3 years ago, really really good. So we're still going to show him that respect now. So
Yeah, I think the other thing I was waiting to see Kyler where he would go, and all the way down to 79 now. Just I guess it's been diminishing returns. I feel like a little bit, but I still think I don't know. 79's low though. I would think at least an 80 would still be the floor, but
yeah, and the grouping of, and I'll throw Deshaun Watson in that same category too, because he didn't necessarily play great when he returned last year,
hmm
but it's like there was a small sample size after missing the first 3 quarters of the season, and we toss him in here at a 78. And you can toss Deshaun Watson at a 78, and no one's really going to complain because no one likes
ex-
Deshaun Watson, and
yeah.
it's
I,
understandable. But it is interesting how far they were willing to drop those guys.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Is I figured the 78 is the outside factors. I don't know if they will put them higher unless maybe a couple seasons down the road, but they tend to do that. Madden tends to do that with players that have off the field issues and stuff like that. They always give them lower, or like specifically within Madden, how people have the superstar abilities and stuff. Like I remember as soon as the Antonio Brown thing started happening, he went to like dev trait, like was bronze or whatever, or the lowest, and so he lost all abilities. So they always like lean into the outside factors and then we'll lower the players then.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess the other like initial reaction out of this group of quarterbacks is like how much they were willing to buy back in on guys like Jared Goff and
Yeah.
Geno Smith. Jared Goff has played a little bit more consistently than Geno Smith has. Obviously, Geno had a great year last year, but Geno is a tough guy to rank just because backup for so long. Then he plays really good last year. Where do you put him? And it's kind of a question. So in all honesty, I won't complain too much about Geno being an 81.
hmm
Maybe a little high, but it's like he had a good year last year, so you have to give him some form of respect.
Yeah, I think, and then I think it was a little lower, but it surprised me that Justin Fields was a 76. I like Justin Fields coming out of college, so I'm a bigger fan than most people, but I thought 76 was a little low, but
Hmm.
I don't, I'm not really like mad at it. I just see that that also that 93 speed though is what you want in Madden. So
Yeah. They did him good with the speed, and once again, this group of quarterbacks also some of the same going on. Like Russell Wilson didn't have a great year last year, but they
hmm
really docked him, and guys like Jimmy Garoppolo, who hey Jimmy, like I feel like he's just going to consistently get put in that mid 70 tier,
yeah.
maybe a little bit higher. So same with Tannehill right now. They're same with Derek Carr. Like those guys moved teams because they weren't great, but they're still gonna toss them right in there in that mid 70s tier.
I want to say too, because when my friends and I would run connected franchises, and you do the whole fantasy draft. I want to say because one of my friends is a Broncos fan, so he would draft Wilson. But Wilson, that must have been a huge drop off from last year because Wilson still had abilities. I know he wasn't red, but I think he was a gold and still had the abilities. And at his 77, I can't imagine he has anything more than a silver now.
Yeah, that is probably the biggest. I bet if we were to look back at men 23 rankings, he probably had the
hmm
biggest drop out of everybody because I mean, even look at what the Broncos traded to get him. It's like
To get
there
him.
was still assets that, and he was still thought of as a really good quarterback. And now after like, hey, he played like crap last year. It's not like he was good last
hmm
year, but
Yeah,
the fall from grace is probably the biggest out of anybody.
I would say so because I would imagine he was probably top 10 last year.
Mhm.
And then now he's almost probably not even like or almost not even top 20 it seems like.
Yep, and then when we switch over to page 3, I imagine some of the guys in this bottom tier are going to look as not as well
Yeah.
ranked because there's still some solid names out there. So page 3, we've got all right, we've got Daniel Jones at a 75 at the top, Matt Stafford 75, Bryce Young, Mac Jones 74, Purdy, Stroud, Kenny Pickett 73, Andy Dalton, Baker Mayfield, Jacoby Brissett 72. Um, the 75 for Matt Stafford is probably the one that sticks out the most to me
Hmm.
because once again, didn't have the best year in 2023, but battled injuries and dropping him all the way down to 75 below guys like Tannehill is that's something. Like you want Matt Stafford this year, you want Ryan Tannehill. Like,
And and the other thing is like, yeah, he didn't have the best year, but then the year before, a Super Bowl,
mm-hmm.
and he was, it was the best trade, or at the time, one of the best trades ever. Like that's in Matthew Stafford took him to Super Bowl, great play throughout the whole year. I don't know the specific touchdown stat he hit that year, but everyone was singing his praise. 1 year goes by, deals with injuries, doesn't have a good year, and then off the way, yeah, he's third page now on Madden. So,
Yeah, and I probably would have kept. I mean, I don't think he needs to be an 80, first page quarterback or anything, but I mean, at least put him in that, higher 70s tier with the guys
hmm,
that we were just talking about, like your Garoppolos, like your Cars. Doesn't look as bad. When you throw him all the way down to a 75, hey, he could come out and suck this year and, get injured again, but, still at his peak, he's even 2 years ago, he's miles better than those guys. So,
yeah, I think the Brock Purdy at 73. I also think's, I don't know, kind of interesting. I'm fine with it because I don't think maybe necessarily he should be lower, but um, like over Kenny Pickett or tied with Kenny Pickett, and then CJ Stroud already at a 73. So I mean, I guess it's fair, but I just think this is fair. But some of the things I hear about Purdy, also dealing with a lot more Niners fans, I guess too in California, of how he was the next Tom Brady because they were so excited when he was 5-0 and Mr. Irrelevant. But so I guess I'm more of a hater a little bit on him, but I do 73 actually does sound fine now I think about it.
yeah, and I feel like the group of quarterbacks from Young all the way down to Pickett is like young guys that we don't know that they don't know exactly what to do with. It's like
Hmm.
you can only rate the rookies so high. You obviously
Yeah.
can't throw them in there at a 78, 80. If they play well, they'll get up to that mark fairly quick. But guys like Pickett, it's like, where do we put him in the pecking order of quarterbacks? There's just a lot of question marks. And Purdy, even more so because he's an undrafted guy or a seventh
Hmm.
round or whatever he was. Um, and he goes out and plays well. You can't put him too high, but you obviously can't bury him in the 60s either. So kind of makes sense that not only those guys got that rating, but those are guys are all clumped together there.
Yeah, I was wondering too, because you would probably know if you've done these. Who was the highest rated rookie? Was it, I imagine, was it Robinson maybe, or at least offensive wise?
Robinson was an 81.
Oh wow, that's very high actually for a
Yeah,
rookie.
and that was the highest, and then Gibbs was a 77, I believe. And then I want to
I
say the
think it's a
wide
little high.
receivers were 77 and a little bit lower. So the running
Uh-huh.
back and receiver rookies were definitely rated much much higher than the quarterbacks. So,
Yeah, interesting.
and last thing I'll say kind of in this grouping is Daniel Jones getting 88 speed, 88 acceleration. Um, like they're probably a little bit high. Like I get it, he's really really athletic, very
Hmm.
underrated athleticism. But I don't remember exactly what Hertz was right off the top of my head, but you know,
His speed was 89.
89. Yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit of a bigger gap
Uh-huh.
there. So
I was just,
uh,
well, 88 speed and 88 acceleration, maybe not necessarily the acceleration, but that speed, I guarantee if you check some of those running backs, that's about like some where some of their speeds are at. So
yep.
like if you went and grabbed the 10th like running back, he probably has 88 speed. So Daniel Jones is, yeah, that's a little weird.
Yeah, he was the running backs were mostly in that a lot of them, especially once you got off the elite running backs, were in that
Hmm.
high 80s tier. So that was that was definitely something. I'm not sure that we need to go any
Yeah.
deeper into quarterback rankings because we're getting to the Dalton, Mayfield, Brissett. At
Hmm.
that point, they're basically just like gonna throw guys in a group and knock them a couple points. So I don't think there's gonna be too many surprises there. But overall, I think it's fairly standard procedure for Madden. You know,
Yeah.
there were some issues. There were some fine rankings. I will say that I think the quarterback rankings were probably a little bit better than the running back and receiver rankings we looked at on Wednesday. So I'll give them credit for the improvement, but That's about as much as we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it is tough a little bit too, because like there's I mean, it's tough probably just doing any ranking in general of because you're always going to have disagreements with
Hmm.
the person next to you doing it. But then too, when it comes to Madden, they got to get the specific stats down, and no one's ever going to agree with like, oh, he faster or throws harder. And then the other thing is it's a video game at the same time, so someone could be 5 spots lower, but video game wise, that quarterback is way better in the game.
Yeah, and like the one thing we talked about, like me and Isaiah talked about, is like when we were looking at receivers, like outside of Jamar Chase, the Bengals receivers were all pretty underrated. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
yeah, you can't give them all. Like if you give all those guys a fair ranking and then give Joe Mixon a good rating on top of a 95 for Burrow, that offense gets insanely good quick, and it almost breaks the
Exactly.
game. So you kind of have to balance that as well. Like obviously not to completely absolve men of all their issues, but there are some reasons for some of the things they do that sometimes people look past. So
I don't know if it was 2K16 or 17, but like you weren't allowed to use that Warriors team because it was Curry's game and he was just unguardable. And then they also had Clay 99 3-point shooting. It was like it wasn't even fair. It's like
yeah,
I'm quitting at halftime, like throwing my controller at my friend.
yeah. Any friend who picks the Warriors in that area is definitely a bad friend.
Yeah.
And that was really the only list of Madden rankings we're going to go through. There were some other, tight ends are out. Some of the defensive positions are out, but we don't need to go through every single
Hmm.
ratings because that'll take us all day. So we're going to swing it over to some UFC news. Obviously, whenever we get a couple UFC people together, there's going to be a little bit more UFC talk than usual. But actually came at a good time because we have some fairly big news in the UFC, and that starts with the fight card for, I guess not the full fight card, but the major fights on UFC 294 being announced. The Abu Dhabi card in October will be headlined by Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira with a co-main event of Paulo Costa and Hamzat Chimaev. So I guess just to start, what are your thoughts on that main event? Because usually we kind of know what we're going to get when we see these announcements. You know who's going to fight who most of the time. It's pretty easy to predict, but this one, we knew it was going to be Islam, but was it going to be Charles? Was it going to be Volk? Was it going to be another lightweight? There were a lot of questions. So, what was your kind of initial reaction to seeing Charles ended up being the one to get the fight?
I was happy because I don't real quick is did you see that like they were saying Edwards or at least Islam was asking for Leon Edwards and then
Yeah.
that stirred up the UFC and it's awful. I hate that because like bro hasn't even defended his title against someone in his actual weight class, and I thought Volk was justified in trying to go double champ status because he's been the king at his division, but like Islam won the belt and then immediately defended against a lower guy and then was asking to fight someone above you. And I'm like, that's not how it should work. You
Hmm.
gotta like fight in your division. So I was happy then knowing he's fighting Charles and he's finally getting to defend against him or defend against his weight class. And then obviously I just also like Charles. I can't imagine no one likes him. He's probably the most entertaining fighter on the roster to me. I feel like all his fights deliver. And for going on such a great win streak like he did, and then to lose kind of quickly is not the word, but it was a disappointing loss. I feel like I think it was a second round finish,
Yeah, fairly
and
one sided.
it didn't look great. And I think he could give him a good fight, and I think he could even win the fight too. So I'm glad he, sometimes it's not your night in the UFC. It's but so I'm glad he gets his, chance at it again, and hopefully he can deliver more,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
maybe, yeah, make things more interesting.
Yeah. And I want to start with the double champ stuff that you brought up as well, because I'm 100% with you on that. I think the best double champ fights are kind of the ones that are built properly, and sometimes they fall flat. And there's certain things that kind of need to fall in place for that to go right. And right now, the welterweight division is backed up. It's like you've got Colby who needs to fight for the title. You've got Bilal who needs to fight for the title. And everyone is saying those are the next two guys. What happens if Shavkat Rakhmonov beats Kelvin Gastelum? Where does he fall in the title picture? So it's like you've got a lot of guys who are knocking on the door of fighting for the title, and you kind of add another guy into that list if you give Islam that opportunity right now. And
Hmm.
I think, 2 or 3 fights down the road, there's some potential for that. But like you said, right now, he hasn't defended at lightweight. And I think that's kind of what you have to do first. And it makes for that eventual double champ fight bigger. That Volkanovski fight the Volkanovski Islam fight was so good because Volkanovski went out there at 145 pounds and beat all the top guys. And there wasn't a clear option for who he was going to fight next.
Hmm.
He goes off and fights for the 155 belt, and then another guy, Iñigo Rodriguez, kind of makes a name for himself and earns a title fight. So that worked out very well. And one of the title fights that I think is a good example of kind of falling flat is Israel versus Blachowicz. It's like
I
that is a
agree.
that is a good example of a double champ fight that did not hit as well as some of the other ones, and that's because obviously Israel did everything that he needed to do, but you had Jan Blachowicz who won the vacant title and was not a reigning champion or was not an established champion. So some of that aura of the double champ was not there. And even then, Jan wins, and it kind of everyone forgets about it. So I
Hmm.
think you kind of have to build up a fight, and if you don't build it up, you kind of waste some really good opportunities. So I'm 100% with you on that. I know that got a little ranty there, but
Yeah.
I'm 100% with you. And then as far as the Charles fight goes, I think this was the best name you could come up with at the time. Right now, Volkanovski just had surgery on his elbow. Gaethje and Poirier are fighting next weekend. There's no chance the winner of that fight is going to be able to fight in Abu Dhabi in October.
Hmm.
So I don't know who else people would have wanted. Dariush obviously just lost to Charles, and you've got Chandler in the top 5. I think people would have been upset if Chandler got the shot. I think Armin Sarukian needs another win. So I'm 100% on board with Charles getting this shot. And even though Charles didn't win that last fight, I do think Charles has some skills that can give Islam trouble. Some of that unpredictability, some of that finishing upside is something that I think you need if you're going to beat Islam. And that's something that he brings that not every other guy brings. Obviously, there's flaws, and Islam has a good chance of winning that. But I think that is one of the more interesting fights you can make in that division.
And like you said, sometimes it does work out. Like you're running through the list of people that maybe could fight. I think that's the other thing of like when fights work out. If everything falls into place, you still end up, some of the times getting the right matchup. And so obviously, I wouldn't mind. Well, probably whoever wins, obviously the Gaethje Poirier actually might get the next shot.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, they're booked. As you mentioned, some other fights, the way those are looking, and who's waiting, who might need to win one more. So I think yeah, Charles deserved it. He just dropped that one fight. He's still what, like 4-1 in his last 5. So um yeah, I have no problem with it. And that should be fun. Like I said, his fights are usually entertaining. And I think although he is beating the same guy, so there might be some criticisms with that. But I didn't think for supposedly be, not necessarily that he will be the new Khabib, but the scariest wrestler, the one of the baddest dudes on the planet, didn't really convincingly at all beat Volkanovski. And he was the one coming up. So this will be a good way to like put his stamp down that like okay, now I am the new champ here, and like maybe I'll go have my era necessarily if he can keep winning in the future
Yeah,
for
and
Islam.
Yeah, and to your point about Charles, he was on that long win streak, so he's like his only loss in like the last 15 fights is to Islam because it's like he was on that long crazy win streak.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember exactly what the number is off the top of my head, but he won a lot of fights in a row. So
Yeah,
and then he had the hiccup against Islam. So, and maybe Islam wins again and wins in just as dominant of a fashion. But if he does, then that's even more respect towards Islam because
exactly.
Charles is a very dangerous guy. So I think this works out well. And at the same time, Volkanovski couldn't make October. So he can fight Topuria at 145. And if he beats Topuria and Islam gets it done. Now we're in a situation where they've each won since that last fight, and that fight once again is probably going to be a very big fight because they built it up, unlike just throwing Islam into a 170-pound title fight again. So
Hmm.
I think that works out well for what we have right now, and it can work out well in the long term as well. And then, what are your thoughts on the Paulo Costa and Hamzat Chimaev fight? This was, they threw around some matchups around because Paulo was supposed to fight next weekend against Islam Ali Skarov, pull him off that card, move him to Abu Dhabi. Personally, I like that more. I think that makes more sense. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I'm not the biggest Hamzat fan, but I think he hasn't fought in a while, so I want to see that. It's it's fun. Like I said, even though I might not like someone, or I don't think someone, I think someone's overhyped. It is still fun as a UFC fight fan when there's like more like casual viewers or even just other UFC fans that really like a guy because it makes the whole fight week more fun, the card more fun. So I'm glad to see Hamzat back in there. And I like Paulo Costa probably more than most people. And so even him, because I still don't know quite if I just think he's entertaining, or I do think he's like talented as well and can make a push for the belt again. So I think this is a perfect fight. It's even like for me specifically, but you get to see either Hamza do his thing again and show everyone that he's still that guy, even though he took a break. And then if Costa wins it, then that should like lets other people know that he's back for it again and ready to maybe finally get off the secret juice stuff and actually get a win in the octagon. Because I guess he beat Luke Rockhold, but I don't know how much you put into a Luke Rockhold
Yeah.
win, but that was also that was in Salt Lake and no one could breathe, so that was kind of annoying. But
Yeah, I'm very interested in this fight for some very particular reasons on both sides. As far as Chimaev goes, we're talking about him being, the next great title challenger, the next great champion, a lot of hype, and I understand why. And I think everything with that is understood at 170, right? I will never argue with anyone who says that he can win the belt at 170. He beat Gilbert Burns, and I think he deserves, if he were to be fighting at 170, he would deserve a title fight for that win. But I feel like the respect that he was given at 170 was also translated to 185, and people just assuming he can run through everybody. But there is a big gap in physicality between
mhm.
170 and 185, and maybe he can deal with it, maybe he can't. I'm really excited to find out because Paulo Costa is one of the bigger guys in that division, and for the Paulo Costa side, I'm interested to see can he get back to like his top form because we haven't seen the best version of Paulo Costa in a minute, whether it be
Yeah.
the altitude of Salt Lake City or whether it be he came in very, very fat and clearly was not training hard for the Vittori fight and the Izzy fight. Maybe Izzy just outclassed him, and that's probably what happened. But whatever happened there, worst case scenario gets outclassed by Izzy. Happens to a lot of guys at
Yeah.
185 who do good things, like Jared Cannonier is looking outstanding nowadays. Got washed fairly easily by Izzy. So, but prior to that, he was a great, great fighter, very dangerous striker, and I'm interested to see if we get that version of him. And if we do, I'm almost willing to call a Paulo Costa upset here, just because I don't love the gas tank out of Chimaev. If Paulo can defend the early wrestling, I really like Paulo's chances in the striking because, I mean, looking at what Gilbert Burns did on the feet, Gilbert Burns found a lot of success on the feet, and he was far, far smaller than Chimaev. Burns is a
Hmm.
former 155er fighting at 170. Good sized 170 pounder, but far from the biggest. So you're going from a smaller to average sized 170 pounder to probably the biggest 185 pounder outside of, I mean, Pereira, who's moved up to
Who's
205
moved?
cents.
Yeah.
So I think if this can stay standing and Costa can defend the early grappling, like 2-3 minutes of it, I think I really like his chances in this fight.
I agree. And I think that was a perfect point earlier of like, I think people are translating the same amount of respect they were giving Chimaev at 172, 180. But you got to keep in mind too, is that the reason he's not fighting at 170 anymore is because he can't make the weight. So
Hmm.
obviously, because he a lot of talent, but obviously he was running through some of these people when he's just so much bigger than them. But now he's moved up and he's no longer the behemoth that he was at the same spot because now you're, like you said, facing the guys that are the same size as you. So you're not getting that highly upper advantage of fighting on a weight class you shouldn't be fighting at. And I think so. I like that too. I think it is a potential upset, but it's yeah, to translate all that respect. 'Cause I guess that was the main thing is he's not fighting at 170 for a reason. It's because he can't make the weight.
Hmm.
So there goes that because he's obviously a great wrestler and stuff, but it's easier. I don't want to say it's easy. It's easier to look dominant when you're a great wrestler and 20 pounds heavier than everyone else, or as soon as you make that weight cut and get all the fluids back in you.
Yeah, and even looking at the fights he had at 170, Gilbert Burns, he admitted that, hey, I felt the Gilbert Burns armbar once, and I didn't want to grapple anymore.
Hmm.
Like he admitted that. And when you look at the Kevin Holland fight, Kevin Holland was out grappled by guys at 185 pounds as well. Obviously, those guys were not as dominant out grappling him. But when you look at a guy like Vittori, look at a guy like Derek Brunson, those guys are not exactly in great places at 185 pounds. They were able to beat Kevin Holland. I love Kevin
Hmm.
Holland. I think he has some good skills, but he's not exactly a big guy either for that 185-pound division. I know that was that tricky catch weight, but that's the biggest guy he's
Yeah.
fought is Kevin Holland. So I think there are, and hey, maybe he goes out there and gets the first round submission, and credit to him if he does. I just want to see that proven, and if he can, he walks right into a title shot. Fine by me. I just want to see it.
Yeah, I agree.
And then, kind of sticking in that middleweight division and the middleweight title picture, we have a lot of news around UFC 293. And so we did the post pay-per-view show, and we talked a lot about how Dricus Du Plessis would be the next title challenger for Israel Adesanya at UFC 293. And the number UFC 293 is kind of important here because Israel Adesanya practically has to fight on that card. He practically has to be the headliner because it is in Australia.
Hmm.
And he's pretty much the only champion that can make that date at this point, it looks like. And he's the only Australian champion that is worth headlining a pay-per-view right now. Volkanovski obviously out, like we mentioned earlier. So Izzy has to be on that card. Dricus Du Plessis said he can't make that card because he's injured. And now Israel Adesanya wants to fight Sean Strickland in Sydney at UFC 293. So this, to me, is kind of a big old debacle and kind of a mess. So what's your initial reaction to hearing how these matchups might play out at UFC 293?
Yeah, I'm not really like ecstatic about it because I'm not the biggest Sean Strickland fan at all. But I think at least if like you just laid out, it seems like it kind of has to happen. So I understand it's not the fight you want, or the fight fans want. But two things. One, I think Izzy should just beat him pretty easily. So if anything, that Duplicity Izzy thing isn't like really too much in jeopardy. Obviously, it's UFC, anything can happen, but pretty solid on. We'll still get that in the future. And while I think didn't he? Because okay, Sean Strickland, I was looking at it real quick. He's on a 2 fight win streak. Because I was gonna say, didn't he just lose like his last fight? But he's fought two. So I don't think he deserves a title shot, but I understand if that's how it works out. Um, but the other thing, I mean, good for Sean Strickland. The one thing I will say is he's a fighter. Like he gets in there,
Mhm.
he fights up multiple times a year. So he's a company man, I would say. So sometimes when you do good things for the company and you work hard and you take multiple fights a year and he stepped in, I think a couple or at least once late time. So then you get these opportunities. So I'm not like really mad at it. I'm just not going to be overly excited. But I will say some fans wanted this early before Strickland lost to Pereira because the press conferences should be fun. So it should still be a fun fight week even though the outcome's probably going to be a certain way.
Yeah, and to your point about Sean Strickland being a company man, he fought last December against Jared Cannonier, 5 rounds, and then takes a short notice fight against Nazardine Imavov in January. So it's like that's the type of guy he is, and he
Hmm.
was willing to fight Abus Magomedov, who was unranked and had one fight in the UFC. So credit to him for being that company man. And I'm not going to overly rate those wins. I don't know how good Abus Magomedov and Nazardini Mavov are going to be. There's things
Hmm.
I like about both guys, but both guys have, had their struggles as well. So maybe those guys end up being really good fighters and they age tremendously, but
Yeah,
they might not turn out, and those wins could end up being, you look back and go, Sean Strickland got a title shot off these wins.
off those
So,
two. Uh-huh. I will
and
say, and
then
maybe I was
go
well
ahead.
because I was gonna ask real quick. Maybe I'm being too hard because I remember I thought Cannonier won the fight, but if wasn't it actually close? It was a pretty close fight, right? Didn't people think Sean won that?
There's a lot of people who thought Sean won. Some people still say he won. I scored it for Cannonier. I rewatched it before Cannonier versus Vittori. I
Okay.
rewatched it while I was doing some film for the Vittori Cannonier fight, and on the rewatch, I thought it was fairly clear for Cannonier, just
Okay.
because he was landing much bigger punches, and it's like Sean, great chin he showed out there, which is a nice kind of thing to show after you get knocked out. But yeah, I thought he
Yeah.
lost, and I thought he lost more clearly after I rewatched it. So
Okay, so because I was gonna say maybe I was being too hard, but if anything, as like you said, Cannonier's been looking great recently. So even that loss, that most recent loss, wasn't a terrible one. If it was maybe not a razor thin decision, but there's still a close fight. Then and then you get two wins after that. So like I said, I'm not. It's not the fight we wanted, but I think I'm fine with that pay-per-view
yeah,
or that
and
title fight.
yeah, and if you look at just purely go off the rankings, it's Duplessis is the highest ranked guy Izzy hasn't fought, and then he's injured. Next one in line is Sean Strickland, highest ranked guy Izzy hasn't fought. So it
Hmm.
makes sense. My biggest question left is what do they do with Jared Cannonier? Because Cannonier and Cannonier didn't get the title shot,
Hmm.
and Cannonier was rumored to be fighting Chimaev on that Abu Dhabi card. Eventually goes to Sean Strickland. So Cannonier kind of both in the two fight announcements that we've talked about, Cannonier is kind of the guy who's getting left out after
Yeah.
absolutely dominating Marvin Vittori. So I'm not sure what they do with him. And to be honest, he's I think 38 off the top of my head. He's an
Yeah.
older guy,
I know he's
so
old.
they're going to need, he probably wants to get active and get as many fights as he can before, that expiration date hits. He is a little bit less experienced than some guys, started MMA later. So maybe he can carry on his career later, but still, time is going to catch up. So he's kind of the one guy who's kind of
I th-
getting the raw end of the deal here. And I don't really know what is
yeah.
next for him.
Because I was gonna say I was looking at the rankings real quick, and there's no one I even see. Like, and I would want to say just sit out, but that's two fights in a row. You're gonna have to sit out because, like you said, the Duplessis is gonna happen next. If I mean, he'll probably get the next one anyways. I guess Duplessis, if even if Strickland wins somehow, but it's tough because then the other thing I would say is like fight Whitaker probably because I think Whitaker's resume still speaks for itself, even though he slipped up against Duplessis. But we've already seen that fight once. And then does that fight, even if he beats, well, if he beats Whitaker, I guess then he would for sure be primed for the next shot. But then again, you run the risk of him losing to Whitaker. And I don't know if the UFC wants to put Whitaker up against Adesanya for the third time. But
Yeah.
that is kind of tough to be that old. Um, have a good wins in the recent years, but Cannonier is I don't know yet. Like you said, he's just gonna have to sit out. He's kind of put on the back burner, and then but maybe the only other thing I can think of is one of those lower ranked guys or the higher ranked guys, I guess, like the 10, 15, 8, 8 and up. Maybe one of them goes on a win streak, and then you can kind of put him up then. But
Yeah, and even like, Sean Strickland gets this fight. Say the one after that goes to Duplessis, and then you have the winner of Costa and Chimaev. And if that's
hmm
Chimaev, then you could make a case that Costa would need another one. In all honesty, Cannonier should probably root for a Costa win, and then he can fight Costa. That's probably would be the best case scenario for Cannonier. If Chimaev wins, now you're looking at the next three title challengers for Izzy all lined up. and
Yeah.
that'd be a really hard group to break. And in all honesty, side note, but if Izzy can run through those three guys, if he can take out Strickland, if he can take out Duplessis, and if he can, take out Chimaev, bang, 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 going to be very, very tough, especially the deeper you go into that run. But if he can do that, there's going to be some serious talks about his legacy, because that would be kind of, his original title run got broken off by Pereira, but then he would have 4 wins in a row against Pereira and those three guys. So
Hmm.
it'd be
That
impressive.
is true. I guess that would be the next matchup then is and then even if Hamzat wins one, I'm fine with him fighting Kanan here too. I mean that's only his first fight middleweight, one fight, like title shot just like that. I
Hmm.
wouldn't be mad at it, but I also would think he could also fight one more time. But you're true. And then I mean in his career, like you were just listing off his title wins. I mean he lost to Pereira and he already wrote that wrong in the rematch. So I guess the yawn thing too will always kind of haunt him.
Hmm.
But then again, no one really when you go try to go up and get the belt, no one like holds that against you too much, I don't think. But that career is looking about as good as a career could look in the UFC. And then that's if we're talking necessarily GOAT status, that's when I think when you get really into the debates of goats, I think that's when I think you should do the more minute things, as in how flashy he was and how funny he was on press conferences, the trash talker, the knockouts, like the performances. And so, I mean, he'd be up there for sure on
Hmm.
Mount Rushmore esque area, career.
Yep. And one last thing I'll add here is I was very pro the Jan Blachowicz and Izzy fight. That was the fight. Jan Blachowicz said he would go down to 185 and fight Izzy at 185. In hindsight, I not to pat my own back here, but that was something that I really wanted at the time. I think we talked about it on the show. And
Hmm.
in hindsight, if they would have booked Jan versus Izzy in Australia, we wouldn't be running into this problem that we're having now. Going, well, I guess he has to fight Sean Strickland, because they would have had that Jan Izzy fight lined up, and they could let Duplessis rest and take the fight after that. So, in hindsight, I think I was right on that side of
Uh-huh.
things, but nonetheless, and that could have let him right the only wrong and the only loss that he hasn't won. So
The other one, because I
yeah.
guess that is too. That's funny too, because like I mean, well, I'm not. That was a bit dumb. I guess like it's fine losing. Like obviously undefeated looks phenomenal,
Yeah.
but that'd be cool to only lose like two times and then you beat both the guys you lose to after that. Then like that's almost like that's even a crazier career because I feel like you don't always get that opportunity.
Hmm. Yep, I'm with you. Um, we're sitting at 47 minutes here. We've ran through all the big topics we wanted to talk about today. Is there anything that you want to throw out there, UFC related, otherwise related, before we shut it down, or we good? We
Yeah,
good to close the show?
I'll just say I think I was looking at the top to bottom. I thought the card tomorrow was actually pretty entertaining. I was
Hmm.
surprised. A lot of fighters I like watching that aren't necessarily big names. Like they're prelim guys or, I guess what it is, I'm blanking non-pay-per-view. Fight night cards.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of good fights, a lot of interesting fights on there. Uh, I think though we kind of what we've talked about the past couple months on these UFC things is how the fight nights have just been awful. Well, this card's in London, so they had to try and they put together a good card, I thought. Once again, when they try, they succeed. I just don't know why they don't try all the time.
Yeah.
Or I wish they
And
would. I know why they don't. I wish they would.
yeah, exactly. Even if it means they cut 2 or 3 cards a year and the other
Hmm.
cards are just better quality, I wouldn't hate that either. But to your point, like you said, a lot of fun fights on these prelims, whether it be just looking at it, Davy Grant, Daniel Marcos. Davy Grant,
Hmm.
fun guy. Daniel Marcos, good prospect. Mark Diakase, Joel Alvarez, those guys both really, really fun fighters. Danny Roberts, always a fun fighter. Brian Barberena on the prelims, and this is
On the
just the
prelims.
prelims. Yeah. Chris Duncan, Ashmos. It's like Chris Duncan had one of the craziest fights I've ever seen on Contender Series. That's
Uh-huh.
that would have been would have won a fight of the night if it was on a UFC card. Jeff Alfilo almost pulled Mokaev's leg off his body a couple months ago. So yeah, like you said, like usually last week we had 8 people who were making debuts, and 4 people who were one fight deep in the UFC, and 3 guys who were on losing streaks. So this card is a nice little breath of fresh air.
Yeah. And then two just quick thoughts because I'm just curious. How do you feel about the Paul Craig Muniz matchup? Uh,
Yeah.
like, who do you think wins that on the ground, like jujitsu, or do you think they cancel out and they actually have to throw? I was curious.
Yeah, I wrote best bets. So for anyone interested in the UFC stuff we're talking about, predictions and best bets are both out. But in best bets, I took Muniz inside the distance,
Okay.
and so I'm heavy Muniz here. And on the ground, I think that Paul Craig can get the subs off the ground. Issue is, yeah, he's terrible at getting the fight to the ground. He doesn't
Exactly.
even attempt takedowns, just pulls guard. I'm not sure that's going to work against Muniz. If it does, I have a hard time seeing Muniz get caught in a sub if he's not death
Hmm.
gassing. He was tired as hell when he got submitted by Brendan Allen.
Yeah.
So I think if they grapple, I think Muniz is going to sit in like full guard or side control and just avoid subs and land ground and pound. If they strike, I'm concerned about Paul Craig's chin at 185.
Yeah. And then the last one, just because he's well, not Sacramento guy, but Team Alpha Male guy. I didn't even because I didn't know Touchy Philly was even on the card. But do you think he has a chance against Wood? I know I was looking at some of the lines yesterday, I think it was, and he was pretty dogged. Nothing like wild, but I want to say it's like 200s, I think, somewhere in there. I'd have
Mm-hmm.
to look again, but how do you see that going a little bit?
Yeah, I like Wood in that fight just
I
because Wood looked great in his fight against
hmm
Jourdain. Absolutely tremendous. And I like Jourdain more than most. And I picked Jourdain to win that fight. And I left that fight going, Nathaniel Wood looked good. So I like Nathaniel Wood here because I like his ability to land the leg kick. And if you land the leg kick on Andre Feely, his movement's not going to be as good. The jab won't be as good. The head kicks won't be as good. But Andre Feely, underrated wrestler, really underrated wrestler, really good head kicks. So I think he has a chance here. But I think Wood is on a very, very high or quick pace towards the top of the division. I like Wood.
Yeah, that's why I think that's funny. I did the same thing. I think I also took Jourdain, and then I left that fight going, okay, Wood might be a problem
Mm-hmm.
uh, for most people. But the other thing is, I just feel like Andre Philly, the fights like he had a run where he went Sadiq Youssef, Charles Jourdain, and then Bryce Mitchell. I'm like, can he ever get like an easy fight, like to
Mm-hmm.
try to bump up again? Because he was getting pushed for a second when he was up there, but I just feel like he always takes hard fights. That's why I'm rooting for maybe if he can pull off an upset, but I would also go Wood. I think it's just it's tough matchmaking. He doesn't get any breaks, I feel like.
Yeah, and when he does get breaks, he wins. Like he got Bill
Hmm.
Algeo and he won. I think he won that. That was a fun fight too.
Yeah.
Won 2 rounds of that, and it's like he beat that. Yeah, on the record, like that Daniel Pineda no contest. He lands an eye poke that stops the fight, but he was
Yes.
beating Pineda bad. He hit him with a couple of head kicks, hurt him with some body shots. Pineda had about 2 minutes left in that fight before he was gonna get finished. Then he gets hit in the eye, and to Pineda's credit, he didn't quit. He wanted to fight. The doctor was
Yeah.
the most diligent doctor I've ever seen. They were actually covering the eye, asking how many fingers they were holding up. He was trying to lie. He was like guessing numbers. He was like 3, and the doctor was like, "No, I'm holding up 1. You're wrong. You can't see."
Yeah.
Like he was trying to lie. He was trying to fight. So not trying to say Pineda quit, but he was getting beat bad, and it was not looking good for him. So
I'm
I
sorry.
like
And then
Feely.
I did actually have one more. Tom Aspinall returns, right?
Mm-hmm.
First fight back because I was huge on him before the injury and that freak accident in like the first 15 seconds. Um, what do you see? I assume you would probably be leaning his way in this fight, and then do you think he'll get back on track after this? And because he was on on track to go to the belt almost like the way he was getting his wins by submissions, knockouts, everything. Do you think he gets right back to it?
Yeah, and well, they gave him that Curtis Blades fight, and then Curtis Blades gets to fight Pavlich for #1 contender. And it's like if that was the opportunity they gave Curtis Blades off an injury, what do they give Aspinall if he wins that fight? One, the UFC loves Aspinall way more than Blades. It's like
Hmm.
nothing against Curtis Blades, but the dude can't get promoted by the UFC to save his life.
Oh my, they hate him.
Aspinall is the complete opposite. They want him to be a champion. So I wonder what that would have looked like if he would have won, how they would have promoted him. But yeah, I think Aspinall wins this fight at a very high percentage. I think he wins this
Yeah.
fight more often than not. It's like I don't know where Marcin Tybura is going to be better. Like, is he going to
Hmm.
take down Tom and submit him? No. Is he going to outstrike him on the feet? No. Tom probably. I mean, Tom's quick as hell. He's way faster and more skilled than most heavyweights. He's fast and he has skills. That's like a
That's
absolute.
what,
That's
yeah,
a
that's you don't see that in
bombshell.
heavyweight. Yeah.
No. So I think he probably just lands a couple big shots and puts them out. So unless the knee's really messed up or unless Tybura can like eat 18, massive hooks and get
Uh,
Aspinall tired from rope a doping him and then win, well, the Aspinall's gassed. It's like those are the only two ways that Tybura wins. So I think it's Tom was asking for this fight, and I think the UFC said, all right. And they put the ball in the tee and they said, all right, go hit a
yeah,
home run in front of a home crowd. They did the same thing to Molly McCann in the co-main. They gave
I
Molly
know.
McCann a girl who's 1-5 in the UFC and can only get arm bars. And people will tell you, yeah, Molly has struggled against elite grapplers. Yeah, she lost to Aaron Blanchfield. She lost to Talia Santos. She lost to Jillian Robertson, who has the most submissions in UFC history. It's like I don't like Molly McCann like that, but it's like, my God, she's getting the biggest layup I've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah. I think she usually performs well though in London. I remember they did that back-to-back cards last year, or like pretty close. Did she? Well, they also her drinking with Patty was fun on the first one, but yeah, she usually does well for the home crowd. So that's why I also don't mind too. London's always super fun. I'm excited for the card. I like
Mhm.
the crowd's always like I said, the atmosphere through the TV. Um, Great viewing experience.
Yeah, and it'll be afternoon here for me. I think we're at let's see, 12-3 on the East Coast. So you've got AM fights over there on the
Yeah,
West Coast.
but
But you know, we're sitting at an hour here. We said we were going to keep
mhm,
the show short, and then
I know.
next thing you know, we're at an hour. But that's all right. I love talking. I love talking Madden. Love talking football, and I love talking UFC. So I had a good time. So.
Yeah.
And to anyone watching, this is the last day of the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show for the week. We'll be back on Monday. Make sure to tune into the website, vendettasportsmedia.com until then. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.